Have you ever wondered if, if your darkest moments can, fuel your greatest work?
Hmm.
Well, today's deep dive
Yeah.
takes us into the world of Carlo Gesualdo,
Oh, yeah.
a 16th century Italian nobleman
Okay.
who was both a brilliant composer
Yeah.
and a cold-blooded murderer.
It's a fascinating paradox,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
He was born into immense wealth, which
Right.
gave him the freedom
Right.
to pursue his artistic passions
Yeah.
with an intensity most
Yeah.
composers could only dream of.
Yeah.
Yet he was also a man tormented by his own actions.
Right.
A man whose life was irrevocably stained by a brutal act of violence.
You're not exaggerating when you say brutal.
No.
The sources you shared
Right.
describe a scene of shocking violence.
Yeah.
Gesualdo, upon discovering his wife,
Right.
Maria di Vellos's infidelity, flew into a jealous rage
Yeah.
and murdered her and her lover, Duke Fabrizio Carafa, in their bedchamber.
Yes, the details are
Yeah.
quite gruesome. Multiple stab wounds, gunshots.
Okay.
It was a crime of passion
Wow.
that sent shockwaves through the Italian court.
Yeah.
What's perhaps even more shocking
Yeah.
is that Gesualdo faced no legal consequences for his actions.
That's hard to grasp, especially from our modern perspective.
Yeah.
How could such a horrific act
Right.
go unpunished?
It all comes down to the social and legal context of the time.
Okay.
You see, the church considered it an honor killing.
Ooh.
In 16th century Italy, a wife's infidelity was seen as a direct attack on her husband's honor.
Oh, wow.
And the law actually permitted a husband to kill both his wife and her lover
Oh, my.
if caught in the act.
So while we might see it as a barbaric act,
Right.
Gesualdo's actions were tragically within the bounds of the law.
Exactly. But even though he was legally in the clear,
Right.
the social repercussions were immense.
Right.
Imagine the whispers,
Yeah.
rumors that spread like wildfire
Yeah.
through the court and beyond. Gesualdo became a figure shrouded in darkness,
Yeah.
forever linked to the brutal murders he committed.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it?
Yeah.
A nobleman driven to murder by jealousy
Right.
and then consumed by guilt and the weight of his actions.
I'm sensing a theme here. A powerful man,
Yeah.
haunted by his past,
Yeah.
seeking redemption through his art.
It's a compelling narrative.
Yeah.
And one that's been explored by artists and historians for centuries.
Yeah.
But before we jump into Gesualdo's musical output,
Right.
we need to understand the trajectory of his life after the murders.
Okay.
He eventually remarries,
Yeah.
this time to Eleonora d'Este.
Right.
But their relationship seems to have been more about political strategy
Right.
than genuine affection.
It's like he's trying to rebuild his life, to regain some semblance of normalcy.
Right.
But the darkness is still there,
Yeah.
lurking beneath the surface.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
There are accounts of Gesualdo becoming increasingly reclusive
Right.
and engaging in acts of self-flagellation, hiring men to whip him
Really?
as a form of twisted penance. It seems the guilt and inner turmoil were eating away at him,
Wow.
driving him to seek solace in pain.
That's pretty intense. We're talking about a man living in extreme wealth and privilege,
Yeah.
yet tormented by his own actions. Is there any indication that he found any sort of peace or redemption?
If there's any light in this dark tale,
Right.
it seems to emanate from his music.
Okay.
Gesualdo was obsessed with pushing musical boundaries,
Okay.
even going so far as to commission the construction of a unique instrument
Wow.
called the archicembalo.
Oh.
It was designed to play microtones,
Oh, wow.
those subtle intervals between the notes of a traditional keyboard,
Okay.
allowing him to create unusual harmonies and explore sonic landscapes that were completely unheard of at the time.
It's almost as if he was trying to express the turmoil within him
Right.
through these unconventional sounds.
Right.
He couldn't find peace in his everyday life, so he sought it through the language of music. That's a very insightful observation, and this is where his story takes an even more fascinating turn.
Oh.
His later works,
Correct.
particularly his madrigals,
Right.
become known for their intense emotional depth
Okay.
and unsettling harmonies. Many scholars believe these compositions are deeply autobiographical,
Oh.
filled with themes of death, sadness, and even a strange sort of joy found in pain.
Hold on. Joy and pain. That seems a bit extreme.
Yeah.
Even for a man who was flagellating himself.
Yeah.
What was going on there?
To understand this, we have to look at Gesualdo's relationship with the renowned poet Torquato Tasso.
Okay.
Tasso's work often explored similar themes of suffering and redemption. As close friends, Gesualdo had unique access to Tasso's unpublished writings,
Yeah.
and it seems that Tasso's words had a profound influence on his
Yeah.
musical direction.
So it wasn't just Gesualdo being morbid or
Right.
indulging in some sort of macabre fascination.
No.
He was tapping into a larger artistic and philosophical movement
Yeah.
that grappled with these dark, complex emotions.
Exactly. And musically speaking, he expressed this through his innovative use of chromaticism,
Right.
which involves using all 12 notes of the chromatic scale,
Yeah.
including those half steps that create a more dissonant and emotionally charged sound
Right.
compared to the traditional diatonic scale. Some music historians even consider Gesualdo a precursor to Wagner,
Oh, wow.
who wouldn't come on the scene for centuries.
That's incredible. So we have this incredibly complex figure,
Yeah.
a murderer, a nobleman,
Mm-hmm.
a man racked by guilt,
Yeah.
but also a musical innovator
Right.
who pushed the boundaries
Yeah.
of his art form.
Right.
This brings up a big question for me,
Yeah.
and I imagine for you as well.
Yeah.
Does understanding the man, his darkness,
Right.
change how we hear his music?
That's a question that every listener has to answer for themselves. Is
Yeah.
it possible to separate the art from the artist?
Right.
Or does knowing the turmoil in Gesualdo's life add another layer of meaning, a deeper resonance to his work?
That's where we'll leave you hanging for now, folks. But don't worry. We'll be back soon to delve even deeper into Gesualdo's musical legacy,
Okay.
exploring what made his compositions so unique
Yeah.
and why they continue to fascinate listeners centuries later.
Right.
If you want to make sure you don't miss part 2 of our deep dive,
Okay.
just hit that subscribe button,
Yeah.
and we'll be back in your feed before you know it.
Great.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and music of Carlo Gesualdo. Before we went away, we were discussing how the violence and guilt that plagued his life seemed to seep into his artistic expression. You mentioned that his use of chromaticism, a technique that created a more dissonant and emotionally charged sound, was a key element in his music. Can you give us a more concrete example of how he used this technique?
Absolutely. You mentioned in your research that you were particularly fascinated by how composers convey emotions through music. Well, Gesualdo was a master of this. Let's look at his madrigal, Moro lasso al mio duolo, which translates to, I die, alas, in my suffering. In this piece, he uses chromaticism to create this almost unbearable tension that perfectly mirrors the text's themes of despair and longing.
I'm starting to understand why some describe his music as tortured. It's like we, the listeners, are experiencing those raw emotions right alongside him.
Precisely. And he doesn't shy away from those difficult emotions. He leans into them, using jarring harmonies and unexpected chord changes to express grief, anguish, even a kind of ecstatic pain that's both unsettling and strangely beautiful.
You mentioned his madrigals earlier. For those who aren't familiar, could you explain what a madrigal is and how Gesualdo's approach to this musical form was so unique?
Madrigals were already a popular form of vocal music in the Renaissance. They were typically secular songs, often about love, nature, or other lighthearted themes. They were written for multiple voices, usually 4 or 5, and were known for their intricate harmonies and interplay between the vocal lines. But Gesualdo takes this form and turns it on its head. He pushes the boundaries of harmony and dissonance, creating these incredibly complex and emotionally charged pieces that are unlike anything that came before him.
So he took a familiar form and injected it with his own unique blend of emotional intensity and musical innovation. I imagine his madrigals weren't just pleasant little tunes to hum along to.
You're right about that. Even seasoned singers find Gesualdo's madrigals incredibly challenging. He pushes the vocal ranges to their limits, uses rapid shifts and dynamics, and packs a lot of emotional weight into each phrase. The singers have to be incredibly skilled to navigate the complexities of his scores and convey the raw emotion that's embedded in every note.
It sounds like Gesualdo wasn't afraid to demand a lot from his performers. It's as if he needed them to suffer a little to push their own boundaries in order to truly do his music justice.
That's an interesting way to put it. And it speaks to this larger theme we've been discussing, the connection between Gesualdo's personal suffering and his artistic expression.
Speaking of suffering, we haven't talked much about the witchcraft trial involving his mistress or his eventual separation from Eleonora. Do these events provide any further insights into his psychological state or his musical output?
They certainly do. The witchcraft trial, which took place just a few years after the murders, involved accusations that Gesualdo's mistress had used magic to try and control him. It gives us a glimpse into the paranoia and suspicion that seemed to plague him during this time. The accusations against his mistress were ultimately dismissed, but the trial itself must have been incredibly stressful and further contributed to his growing sense of isolation.
And his separation from Eleanora, was that related to the witchcraft trial?
There's no direct link, but it's clear that their relationship was troubled from the start. She was a woman of great stature, coming from a powerful family, while Gesualdo, despite his wealth, was still seen as a figure tainted by the murders. They had one son together, but he died in infancy, which seems to have further strained their relationship. Eventually, they separated, and Gesualdo retreated even further into his music.
So we have these two events, the witchcraft trial and the separation from Eleonora, both happening within a few years of each other. It seems like Gesualdo was really struggling during this period, grappling with inner demons as well as external pressures. How did this manifest in his music?
Well, it's in his later madrigals that we see this darker, more introspective side of Gesualdo fully emerge. The texts he sets to music during this period are filled with references to death, despair, and the search for solace in a world that feels increasingly hostile and unforgiving.
You mentioned earlier that some of his madrigals seem almost autobiographical.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. Consider these lines from his madrigal Ardo per te mio bene, which means, I burn for you, my beloved. Words sweet and dear, you make me suffer, but the wound in my heart feels not pain, but only delight. It's a paradoxical statement that captures this strange sense of finding pleasure in pain, a theme that echoes throughout his later work.
It's almost masochistic, isn't it? But given what we know about his penchant for self-flagellation, maybe it's not so surprising. It's like he was trying to transmute his own suffering into something beautiful, something meaningful through his music.
That's a very insightful observation, and to achieve this, he uses every tool in his musical arsenal. His use of chromaticism becomes even more pronounced, his harmonies more daring, his melodies more angular and unpredictable. He's pushing the boundaries of what's considered acceptable in music, creating a sound that's both captivating and unsettling.
We talked before about his friendship with the poet Torquato Tasso, whose work explored similar themes of suffering and redemption. Do you think Gesualdo's music can be seen as a direct response to Tasso's poetry, or was he tapping into a larger artistic movement that was happening at the time?
It's likely a combination of both. Gesualdo was deeply influenced by Tasso's work, and it's clear that they shared a similar worldview, one that embraced the darker aspects of human experience as a path to spiritual understanding. But Gesualdo was also a product of his time, and his music reflects the artistic and philosophical currents that were swirling around him.
You're referring to mannerism, right? We touched on this earlier, but can you explain how Gesualdo's music fits into this broader artistic movement?
Mannerism emerged in the late Renaissance as a reaction against the High Renaissance's emphasis on harmony, balance, and idealized beauty. Mannerist artists, whether they were painters, sculptors, or composers, were more interested in exploring the complexities and contradictions of human experience. They weren't afraid to use distortion, exaggeration, and unsettling imagery to evoke strong emotions and challenge the viewer's perceptions.
So how did Gesualdo embody these Mannerist ideals in his music?
Well, think about his use of dissonance, his unexpected harmonic shifts, his melodies that seem to twist and turn in unexpected ways. He's deliberately breaking the rules of traditional harmony, creating a sound that's both beautiful and unsettling. He's not trying to soothe the listener, he's trying to provoke them, to make them feel something deeply and perhaps even uncomfortably.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to the darker aspects of human nature, forcing us to confront those emotions that we might otherwise try to suppress or ignore.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it's this willingness to confront the darkness, both within himself and in the world around him, that makes Gesualdo's music so compelling, even centuries later.
We're back for the final movement of our deep dive into the world of Carlo Gesualdo.
Mm.
We've explored his life, his music, his demons.
Mm.
But what about his lasting impact? You mentioned that his music wasn't exactly a hit after his death.
Yeah, it wasn't widely performed for
Right.
quite a while after
Yeah.
he died. It was known to scholars and a few hardcore music enthusiasts,
Okay.
but not the general public.
Right.
His scores, those madrigals with all their emotional turmoil and harmonic daring,
Yeah.
they were like hidden treasures waiting to be rediscovered.
So his music isn't exactly easy listening.
Right?
I can understand why it wasn't played much after he died.
Right.
Who brought Gesualdo back into the light?
One key figure was Aldous Huxley,
Okay.
a writer
Right.
in the 1920s.
Okay.
He came across Gesualdo's work and was completely captivated. He wrote about Gesualdo with admiration. Oh, wow.
And a bit of morbid fascination,
Right.
helping to introduce a new generation to his music.
So Huxley was like Gesualdo's hype man,
Yeah.
getting people interested in him again.
Right. Yeah.
But to have a lasting impact, you need other artists to pick up the torch and carry those influences forward. Did that happen with Gesualdo?
Yes, it did. In the 20th century,
Right.
several major composers were deeply influenced by Gesualdo's work,
Okay.
including Igor Stravinsky.
Stravinsky.
Yeah.
That's a huge name in the music world.
Yeah, he saw in Gesualdo a kindred spirit.
Oh, wow.
He saw a composer who wasn't afraid to break the rules
Right.
and explore new sonic landscapes.
They both pushed boundaries, challenging traditional harmonies,
Yeah,
creating music that was more than just pretty.
exactly.
Yeah.
Stravinsky even copied some of Gesualdo's madrigals by hand,
Wow.
immersing himself in their intricacies. In 1960,
Okay.
he composed Monumentum Pro Gesualdo,
Okay.
a tribute to Gesualdo.
Oh.
Wow. So even though most people didn't know Gesualdo's music for a long time,
Right.
his influence still found its way into the works of modern composers like Stravinsky.
You said in your notes that you were interested in the concept of musical legacies.
Yeah.
Well, Gesualdo's is a fascinating example of how an artist's work can have a ripple effect across time,
Right.
influencing later generations in ways that might not be immediately apparent.
Gesualdo planted a seed
Right.
that later blossomed into a whole new wave of musical innovation.
That's a great way to put it. And beyond direct musical influences,
Yeah.
Gesualdo's story continues to fascinate people today.
We talked earlier about the Werner Herzog film.
Yeah,
Gesualdo's dramatic life
right.
seems perfect for movies.
His story is a powerful reminder
Yeah.
that even in the darkest corners of human experience, art can flourish. It's a powerful reminder that art is a reflection of the artist,
Right.
their time, and their struggles.
So what's the main takeaway you'd like listeners to have from our deep dive into the world of Carlo Gesualdo?
I think it's important to remember that art doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by the world around it.
Right.
In Gesualdo's case, his music is a powerful reflection of his internal struggles and the world he lived in. His music might be challenging at times, but it's also deeply moving and relatable. We see a man wrestling with guilt, desire, and the search for meaning,
Right.
which are themes that continue to resonate with us today.
So what can our listeners do to experience Gesualdo's music for themselves?
There are a lot more recordings of his music available today than in the past. You can find traditional vocal ensembles as well as modern groups who are putting their own spin on these Renaissance masterpieces.
You can also check out recordings of Stravinsky's Monumentum Pro Gesualdo
Yeah, that's a good one.
to hear how a 20th century master interpreted the music of this Renaissance rebel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe listening to Gesualdo will inspire you to explore other lesser-known composers. There's a world of musical treasures out there just waiting to be discovered.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration of history's most intriguing figures and ideas.